Hello, welcome back. In this video, we'll discuss the solid fuel cells. Before understanding what solid fuel cells are, let us look at what fuel cells are. A fuel cell is a device that converts chemical potential energy into electrical energy. It's a device that converts chemical potential energy, that is the energy stored in molecular bonds, into electrical energy. A fuel cell is a device that converts chemical potential energy into electrical energy. Unlike a generator, a fuel cell directly converts an energy source into electricity through a chemical reaction. This involves one step rather than multi-steps. Since it is a single-step process, this makes the fuel cell efficient, quiet and clean. It is efficient in terms of the energy, and it is quiet because there are no moving objects in the fuel cell. As a consequence, you do not get any noise, so it becomes quiet, and it is clean with respect to the environmental friendliness. So it is a green energy source. Now we shall see the difference between fuel cell and a battery. The biggest difference between the two is that a battery stores energy while a fuel cell generates energy. A battery stores energy while a fuel cell generates energy. A fuel cell essentially generates the electrical energy. The battery stores the energy and the fuel cell generates the energy. Fuel cell generates the energy by converting the available fuel. A fuel cell can have a battery as a system component to store the electricity it's generating. The main difference between these two is one stores the energy, the other one generates the energy. Now we shall see the types of fuel cells. The fuel cells are classified by the kind of electrolyte they employ. Here, the electrolyte plays a key role, and it must permit only the appropriate ions to pass between the anode and the cathode. If free electrons or other substances could travel through the electrolyte, they would disrupt the chemical reaction. As long as a fuel cell is supplied with hydrogen and oxygen, it will generate electricity. So before we understand the types of fuel cells, we should know that the electrolyte plays an important role. The electrolyte must permit only appropriate ions to pass between the anode and the cathode. If free electrons or other substances could travel through the electrolyte, they would disrupt the chemical reaction. So whether they combine at anode or cathode, together hydrogen and oxygen form water, which drain from the cell. As long as the fuel cell is supplied with hydrogen and oxygen, it will generate the electricity. Now the types are like this: polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cells, alkaline fuel cells, phosphoric acid fuel cells, molten carbonate fuel cells, solid oxide fuel cells. Now we shall see how the fuel cells they work. Working of fuel cells. There are several kinds of fuel cells and each operate a bit differently. But in general terms, hydrogen atoms enter a fuel cell at the anode, where a chemical reaction strips them of their electrons. The hydrogen atoms are now ionized and carry a positive electric charge. The negatively charged electrons provide the current through wires to do the work. Hydrogen atoms enter a fuel cell at the anode, where a chemical reaction strips or removes them of their electron. The hydrogen atoms are ionized. Ionized atoms, they are the protons and carry a positive charge. The electrons provide the current through wires to do work. That is how a fuel cell works. We'll supply the hydrogen atoms and they enter the fuel cell at the anode, where a chemical reaction takes place and the chemical reaction strips them of their electrons. And these electrons, they provide the current through the wires to do the work. So here the oxygen enters the fuel cell at the cathode and combines with electrons returning from the electrical circuit, and hydrogen ions that have traveled through the electrolyte from the anode. The oxygen picks up electrons and then travels through the electrolyte to the anode, where it combines with hydrogen ions. Oxygen enters the fuel cell at the cathode, and it there combines with electrons returning from the electrical circuit and hydrogen ions that have traveled through the electrolyte from the anode. In other words, oxygen picks up electrons and then travels through the electrolyte to the anode, where it combines with hydrogen ions. Now we shall see the hydrogen fuel cell. In this, hydrogen plus oxygen gives electricity plus water vapor. The mechanism is quite simple. Hydrogen plus oxygen gives electricity plus water vapor. And this happens using a proton exchange membrane. A proton exchange membrane cell uses hydrogen gas and oxygen gas as fuel. The products of the reaction in the cell are water, electricity and heat. This is how a typical PEM or proton exchange membrane looks like. So we have the hydrogen flow field, we have the hydrogen entering in this region, we have the anode, we have the PEM. PEM is here. These two are the backing layers. We have the oxygen entering from here, from air. We take the oxygen. We have a cathode. We have an anode. Between these two, we have the PEM. The working principle of a proton exchange membrane fuel cell is, so we have hydrogen flow field. Hydrogen gas is fed like this. We have backing layers. Oxidant flow field will be like this. You have the anode here. This is the anode. Hydrogen fuel is channeled through field flow plates to the anode on one side of the fuel cell, while oxidant oxygen or air is channeled to the cathode. At the anode, the platinum catalyst causes hydrogen to split into proton and electrons. This is the cathode, this is the anode. At this place, hydrogen is split into protons and electrons. Here we have the polymer electrolyte membrane that allows only the positively charged ions to pass through to the cathode. The negatively charged electrons must travel along an electrical circuit to the cathode, creating an electric current. Now at the cathode, the electrons and positively charged hydrogen ions, they combine with oxygen to form water, which flows out of the fuel cell. This can be explained using this diagram. You have the anode. We are supplying hydrogen to anode. It provides the protons, and the protons are present in the electrolyte. We have the cathode. On this side we are supplying the oxygen, and the electrons that are stripped off from the hydrogen, they would move along this wire to the load. Through the load they pass, they recombine with the hydrogen ions and oxygen to form the water vapor. That is how a hydrogen fuel cell works. In this video we have seen what a fuel cell is. We have said a fuel cell is a device that converts chemical potential energy into electrical energy, and the fuel cells are famous because they are efficient, they are quiet and clean. We have seen the difference between a fuel cell and a battery. We have seen the types of fuel cells. We have seen the working of a fuel cell. We have said that hydrogen atoms, they enter at the anode, where a chemical reaction strips them of their electrons, and the protons, they carry a positive charge. The electrons provide the current through the wires to do the work, and oxygen enters the fuel cell at the cathode. It then combines with the electrons returning from the electrical circuit and hydrogen ions that have traveled through the electrolyte from the anode. We have seen one simple example of a fuel cell, that is hydrogen fuel cell, where hydrogen plus oxygen gives rise to electricity plus water vapor. We have seen a proton exchange membrane cell that uses hydrogen and oxygen as fuel to generate electricity. We have seen how the proton exchange fuel cell works. Thank you.